Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? No, not.
It's the second little one.
How about now? Better? Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is the Department of Anthropology's Annual Graduate Research Symposium. We are thrilled to have you all here. This is completely organized by graduate students in the department, and we're going to feature all of their work that crosses multiple disciplines. If you just joined us, there are refreshments in the hallway, so please help yourself. There will also be a break. It's about a 10-minute break halfway through, where you're welcome to get more refreshments and coffee and tea, and we'll also have some poster sessions during that break as well. Just some housekeeping notes. If you're looking for the bathrooms are bookending either side of the elevator lobby. So if you take a right out of this room, the first right before you get to the elevators will be the men's restroom, and then on the other side of the elevator lobby on the right will be the women's restroom. We have a number of people to thank. Even though this was graduate student produced, we could not be here without a number of generous sponsors. So we want to say thank you so much to the Consulate of Greece in Atlanta, as well as the GSU. Thank you. Also, tremendous thanks to the GSU Anthropology Club for the refreshments as well, and also to our alumni donors. So thank you very much. We also absolutely want to thank our professors, Dr. Papavasiliou and Dr. Turner Livermore, for their guidance and support in helping us put together this symposium. So thank you both so much. And of course, thank you to the Department of Anthropology as well. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Sarah Gardner. She will be presenting her thesis work in biological anthropology.
Hi everyone. All right. All right. So my thesis is titled An Experimental Study of Bone Tools from Swartkrans, South Africa. So in 1924, Raymond Dart described the remains of the Tong child. These fossilized remains of Australopithecus africanus were discovered 1 year prior by quarrymen in Tong, South Africa. The discovery changed the location that paleoanthropologists thought to be the origin of species. This shift, away from Europe and Asia and toward East and South Africa, led to a plethora of scientists searching the area for more fossils. In 1938, as a result of this effort, a team led by John Robinson and Robert Broom discovered the remains of Paranthropus robustus. It was originally thought to have been the adult version of the Tong child, but upon further study, it became obvious that this was an entirely new species. Paranthropus robustus exhibits massive chewing structures. The molars and premolars are much larger than other hominids, but the incisors and canines are much smaller than those observed in Australopithecines. The face exhibits massive muscle attachments along the zygoma and frontal bones, as well as a sagittal crest to anchor additional chewing muscles. 10 years after this discovery, John Robinson and Robert Broom were excavating additional sites in South Africa, which were yielding even more robustus fossils when they found Swartkrans Cave. This is a highly complex cave system that was unfortunately discovered by gold miners and as a result has been highly damaged by surface blasts. Nonetheless, this cave system produced more fossils than they ever imagined. In total, the cave system was excavated 7 times. The initial excavation only revealed the uppermost portion of the cave system, which is that closest to the surface. And from this initial excavation, they found a minimum of 87 robustus individuals, 17 early Homo individuals, and 64 additional mammalian taxa. In addition to these remains, they also found unusual non-primate bone that showed extensive signs of wear at the end. They were all very similar in size and shape, and they were the leg bone of some of the mammalian species found in the cave system. Those excavating the caves noted that these tools looked like the digging tools that they themselves were using, and after many studies to prove this theory, it is accepted that these tools were used by Robustus as digging implements. Now, tools of this nature had been discovered at Sterkfontein, another robustus fossil site, prior to the discovery at Swartkrans. However, the tools found at Sterkfontein were a bit different, and several of them had a shine to them. It is hypothesized that these shiny tools were actually used to work animal hides, thus giving them this polished look. But none of the tools at Swartkrans Cave had this polish to them, so other hypotheses were soon developed. Understanding the kinds of foods Robustus ate led to theories that these tools were used to dig for tubers or termites. And as kind of a catch-all, in case no single task could be proven, many hypothesized that these tools could possibly be multi-purpose. Now, reconstructing the diet of Robustus can be done through dental morphology and isotopic analysis. These huge molars would be great for tough, fibrous foods, like the tubers. The teeth also show signs of pitting, indicative that they ate foods with grit. Tubers would have likely been eaten with grit still on the tuber. Now, termites account for the low C4 signature observed in the fossil remains, and they would have been a great source of protein and readily available where Robustus lived. The grit in the teeth could have also come from the grit located on the termites. Now, my research analyzes the microwear of the tools to conclude which task is most likely between digging for tubers and digging for termites. If we think about the mechanics of each task, it is reasonable to think that they would leave very different markings on the bone. Chimpanzees have been observed fishing for termites. This method involves making a small hole in the termite mound, using a stick to push into the mound, and then pulling the stick straight out. The termites have a defense mechanism of biting their threat, so when the stick was inside the termite mound, they would bite onto the stick and then be pulled out and eaten by the chimpanzee. The matrix of the particles in the mound are much more uniform in size and structure than the composition of dirt surrounding tubers, so hypothetically we would see this reflected on the tools. Now, digging for tubers is much more complicated. Modern farmers who dig for tubers recommend pushing into the ground underneath the tuber and then twisting the tool to break the roots around the tuber. Then you can push the tuber upward to release it. This method would leave a much more chaotic scratch pattern on the tool because of the particle size and directionality of the tool as compared to that of the termite tool. Now, these experimental bone tools were created by Jason Heaton and Travis Pickering to exemplify the microwear each substrate would leave on the bone. They dug for tubers, termites, and then alternated between tubers and termites for 120 minutes. And I have microscopically analyzed these experimental tools to determine if there were true statistical differences between these tools. My results show that the termite tools are much more different than the tuber and multipurpose tools, as shown by this graph. So this byline plot shows the difference. On the termite tool, which is the one represented in the middle, the majority of the scratch angles center around 90 degrees, or parallel to the axis of the tool. The tuber tool is much more varying, with scratches perpendicular and parallel to the axis, and the tools used for both show almost normal distribution between 0 and 180 degrees. Now, when I uploaded the data from the original bone tool into this same program used to measure the angle, the similarities between the original tool and the experimental termite tool are shocking. The breadth of the scratches are thin, much like the breadth of the termite scratches. This observation has been reported many times before as strong evidence for termite usage. Now, this histogram shows the distance from 90 degrees to manipulate the data in an easier format to view. We see the green bars representing the termite scratches, and much more frequent around 90 degrees, where the tuber tools are evident further away from 90 degrees. I include a box and whisker plot at the top to represent the original bone tool data, and it lines up very well with the data from the termite tools. So by showing that Robustus had access to termites, this study supports the theory that Robustus ate lots of proteins. Termites were a good source of nutrition for Robustus, and it shows a shift away from a plant-based diet and towards a more varied diet that includes termites and meat. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I can answer them. Yes?
We're doing the panel at the end.
At the end?
Yeah, we're doing before the coffee break. You'll have a chance to ask questions to everyone who's gone before then. Oh, thank you. That's fine.
All right. right, thank you so much, Sarah. So yes, as Alexis just mentioned, we will have time for questions. We're going to have 2 opportunities for questions, one right before our halfway break and then one right before we end the symposium. So thank you so much, Sarah. Next up, I am pleased to welcome Michaela Razzo to the stage. She will be speaking about her thesis work on the production of a community museum in Mexico. So welcome, Michaela.
It's supposed to be millennial and I suck at technology. Okay, so hi, as Nicole very nicely introduced me, my name is Michaela Razzo. I'm a second year graduate student here at GSU, and I work very closely with Dr. Jeffrey Glover, who is a professor here in the Anthropology department, on his project, Proyecto Costa Escondida, down in Mexico. And I will be presenting my thesis about the work that I'm doing, facilitating the process of creating a community museum in Chiquila, titled, very lengthy, From the Past to the Present, collaborating on the production of a community museum in Chiquila, Quintana Roo, Mexico. So, going for it. So, Chiquila is on, sorry. To get a sense of this project, we're going to start with a brief introduction before moving on to talk about the content and the sorts of things that go into this museum, and then moving on to concluding thoughts. So to start off, to get a sense of this, oh my God, I'm really sorry guys. It's been a long day.
You got this.
So the Chiquila Community Museum project, although it's still in its initial stages, is a co-creative project in collaboration with other research institutions, government organizations, and the local community of Chiquila to create a museum exhibit that aspires to do 3 things: empower the local population through collaboration, serve the community as a reliable source of information, and provide an adaptable and manageable platform for sustainable development. I've mentioned Proyecto Costa Escondida, or PCE for short, and Chiquila quite a few times, but what is PCE and where is Chiquila? So PCE is an interdisciplinary research project that investigates the relationship between humans and the environment along the north coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, circled here. Located within the Yalajao region, highlighted up in the corner, Chiquila is on the shore of Laguna Yalajao and is surrounded by a rich ecological and marine environment. The small fishing town currently has a population of about 6,000 people, and it is made up of natives, indigenous Maya communities or groups, and migrants from other places in Mexico. So if Chiquila is a prime location surrounded by rich resources, culturally, ecologically, and historically, why is the museum being built now? Why not earlier? And this is because over the past couple of years, there's been a growing interest in Holbox, located here, right across from Chiquila. And this has been developed and advertised as a tourist attraction with white sandy beaches, pats of flamingos, whale shark tours, and a slew of other activities. However, in order to get there, a person must first pass through Chiquila. While this photo may be a little old, it will still get our point across here. So once people disembark from their mode of transportation, whether this be bus or car, they're immediately making their way to the center of town, as seen by this red line. And from here, they're purchasing tickets at, I think this past March when I went, there's 3 or 4 different counters where you can buy tickets for 2 businesses. So that's 2 counters per business. And the ferries run every 30 minutes throughout the day from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. for totaling about 30 ferries in a single day. And so once they purchase their ticket, they begin making their way down the dock to then board the boat. Yeah. And so on average, whether people are coming in or leaving Cheek or Holbox, they're spending an average about 15 to 30 minutes actually passing through the town. So unless they choose to have a sit-down meal, most are purchasing snacks at a corner store and waiting for their bus underneath a shaded patio. And because they spend so little time actually in the town, and it lacks the same sort of attraction and advertising as Holbox, Chiquila is missing out on the profits of tourism. And it is exactly this interest in attracting more people and their wallets that has pushed for the development within the community. And so, where there once existed empty lots like this one, along with this beautiful dog, she's precious by the way, there are now 3-story hotels. The number of parking lots, restaurants, and corner stores have all drastically increased, probably doubled or tripled in the past 2 years alone. And this has mostly been along the main road and at the center of town. And so, in late 2017, going into early 2018, the Secretary of Tourism funded the Chiquila Tourist Parador project and was completed in May of 2018 with the construction of 3 buildings. They decided to take this roundabout, which was incredibly pedestrian friendly, with benches and sidewalks going through it. It was usually used for festivals during the summertime or during festival seasons, which was really great because you had this roundabout full of like these little tents, nice old great food, and really janky roller coasters. But they took this and they built this. And in many of our conversations with people, they are dubbing this the white elephant, not only because it was built without community consent, but also because it's this colossal monstrosity that can be seen as you're entering into town. And this picture is taken, I think, right after we pass the entrance. And so the other 2 buildings come in the form of a park and an alcaldía, which is the mayor's building. He has recently moved in, and he uses the adjacent room as this sort of like meeting room for himself, which is interesting. But the idea of a community museum came about in 2016 when Dr. Glover spent 6 months in Chiquila for an excavation season at the nearby site of Vista Alegre. But the idea did not gain much traction during these conversations. And so when the dust had settled around the new constructions in the summer of 2018, we were given the opportunity to propose the Chiquila community project. And our proposal was wholly approved of, and we seemed to gain support almost overnight. But having verbal support at this stage is very easy. It's having community interest to see this project succeed that has been one of the harder challenges that we're facing right now. And so the Chiquila Community Museum project follows the process of facilitating in the production and creation of a community museum to identify the dynamic relationship between the coastal inhabitants and the changing landscape, both past and present, through scientific investigations and local knowledge. The purpose of the museum comes in 3 parts. To first and foremost, operate as a co-creative project used to empower the population through the control of their own representation and to help build capacity for research and stewardship. The second is to serve the community through authentic information as a reliable source of history for both the locals and tourists. And third, to provide an adaptable and manageable platform for sustainable tourist economy without drastically altering the realities of Chiquila's identity and history. And so our overall goal is to involve and engage the people of Chiquila as much as possible, because at the end of the day, this is their museum and this is their history. So a big part of this project is working with various stakeholders who all have an interest in the tourist parador constructions, as well as the community project. So not only do we have to be in contact on the local level with people of Chiquila, the mayor, the ejido landowners, members of the fishing cooperatives, and the directors from the schools, but also on the federal level with government officials from the National and State Secretary of Tourism, the municipality, the National Commission of Protected Areas, and the National Institute of Anthropology and History. Each stakeholder has a different opinion about how the spaces can and will be used. And despite the fact that it's been almost a year since construction was finished, the center building has yet to open its doors. However, this has more to do with community dissatisfaction over the perceived misappropriation and pocketing of funding, which could have gone towards the infrastructural development like roads and water facilities. Pardon me. So the first proposal here on the left was drafted in May of 2018. The second one here on the right was drafted this past February. While they both express the potential of each space, the newer one on the right is a little more focused on the opportunities and benefits that the museum could provide. So the purpose of this version is to be more specific about the project's next steps and to propose the establishment of a museum committee to have a community organization administering the use of the spaces. I have one if anyone is interested in seeing it during the break. So one of the biggest challenges we face is encouraging community interest. The success or failure of the museum project depends entirely on the motivation and willingness of the locals to create and manage and ultimately sustain a museum using buildings they didn't ask for. Otherwise, we're just another group coming in and dictating, which defeats the purpose of our work. So over spring break this past March, we were able to engage with a lot of different people, a lot on the local government officials and also with people actually in the community, like the directors of the schools. But we were also able to engage with young children. And it was such a different experience than what we had with the adults. It was really exciting. And so we ended up doing a drone demonstration at the elementary school equivalent. And we started with one class in a semicircle, and it quickly devolved into chaos. And so my colleague Nathania, who's sitting on the floor here, she was like a queen bee with a colony surrounding her. And it was exciting though, because these kids were really interested in the work that we're doing, and we were able to really talk to them and explain some of the stuff that we were doing. And it's extremely important because children do what children do best, and that's that they talk. They talk to their friends, they talk to their teachers, but most importantly, at the end of the day, they're going home and talking to their parents. And they're talking to anybody who will listen to them. And so unknowingly, these kids are helping us disseminate information about what we're doing and the project that's happening in Chiquila. And so in moving forward, Nathania and I are interested in sort of revamping the proposal and basing it on some of our conversations this past March. But we're super pumped about the potentiality of the spaces. And we try to acknowledge and be explicit about the fact that this is not a quick process, to ensure that we are only facilitators here, and that the museum, its content, and any future benefits will and truly come from the community and their collaboration. We are taking our time to make sure that there is a vested interest in procuring long-term and sustainable museum. It is better to take our time to make a meaningful connection with locals to co-create a museum based on the needs and desires of Chiquila's inhabitants. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Michaela. All right, so next up, please join me in welcoming Travis Edwards up to the stage. Travis will be speaking about their work on depression, the affect, and the self. So welcome, Travis.
Yo. So first, hello everyone. I'll be reading a paper today, right, that I wrote. So it's a little housekeeping before we kind of get started. Just give a general kind of content warning about. So this, what I'll be talking about will involve a lot of depression, suicidalization, and suicide itself. So if that is blood for anyone, or if you want to step out, that's totally cool and whatnot. So this is a paper I wrote last semester. The paper consists of 4 different vignettes of depressive episodes, but I'll be sharing 3 of them, and not the entirety of them. I'm just gonna save on time, but you'll kind of see how it goes. One last thing to kind of wrap this up before I kind of get started. My purpose is not to garner any kind of empathy or sympathy in sharing these narratives, but to kind of expound on social theory and ideas to help anthropology kind of better understand these kind of subjective experiences and whatnot. So with that being said, please do not try to feel the need to like hug me or anything like that. That's not okay. I want to kind of start it kind of towards the end, and then I'll start in the beginning. So the idea to write about depression, affect, and the self came to me as a means of exploring a concept that I was working with and kind of termed, which was performative emotionality. I found it to be kind of an incredibly useful way of explaining affect and how it kind of can create these micro and macrocosmic transformations. I wanted to speak on depression because I knew it was something I personally experienced, thus it would be easier to speak about, and finding literature on the subject would be interesting. I thought this description of affect would be more compelling if I had an artifact to kind of analyze, but I struggled with the idea of doing any data collection due to time constraints and the simple fact I just didn't really want to, right? So using myself became very convenient. But it speaks to a larger thing I want to point out too. So, without further ado, let's get started, right? So I want to embark a discussion about depression, affect, and their transformative and performative process by contextualizing these ideas with a series of vignettes that show depressive episodes. These narratives are my own experience as a person who struggles with depression. I chose to utilize an autoethnographic method because it kind of sets up a clear link to my own notion of selfhood that I believe wrestles with larger cultural and affective transformations that I want to detail. As a epistemological methodology, I want to situate myself within the narrative of depression to allow for a subjective understanding that cannot be surmised by grand theoretical notions of the self. Right? I want to speak from my own experiences of depression and how theoretical approaches to affect can help anthropology better understand these subjective experiences. There is much I want to convey through these narratives. My overall goal with this paper is to explore depression either as an insular feeling of deep emotion, nor as an analysis rooted in psychomedical or biochemical context, but rather to view depression through the lens of affect. So what I'm arguing is that kind of depression is like this series of affective performative acts or regulatory practices that seek to convey specific ideations. I also suggest that it creates affective attachments to the restructuring and reorienting of the self. I am wary of these quote-unquote master narratives that define depression as personal emotive responses due to childhood trauma or biochemical understanding of innate feelings that one cannot control. Right? However, I don't want to be misconstrued. I'm not saying that depression is not a mental illness or that it's a series of nebulous feelings with no basis. I only suggest that depression involves affective practices and that these practices are inextricable from culture. I attempt to understand the complexity of feeling, emotion, and affect as it relates to depression and its supposed antithesis, happiness, and suggest that depression is an affective transformation of the self that's created through an embodied practice, or as I termed, performative emotionality. How do we, or more specifically, how do I convey feelings of isolation, despair, and understanding of myself? This is we'll start with our first narrative, and it's called I Don't Feel Happy. I don't know why, but for as long as I can remember, I had always been able to wake up this early despite sleeping late. The earlier I wake, the earlier I can engage in activities that I know will bring me joy, because I really haven't been feeling that recently. I know I have something to do, or rather, I know I have something to do, but there is an overwhelming lack of motivation that's preventing me from reaching over to get my laptop to type a single page. Work isn't going to happen today, I say aloud to myself. I have been told by my counselor and friends that when I'm feeling this way, I need to do things that make me happy. I notice my guitar in the corner and proceed to pick it up in an almost anxious effort to try to be somewhat productive. Guitar had always been a respite for me in these times of feeling anguished. I strum and pick away at the strings, only for me to suddenly stop after a few minutes. I stare at the guitar and think of how I'm not good enough to even continue playing anyway. Playing guitar did not elicit any joy in me, thus I wanted to move on to another activity I deemed enjoyable. I sat down in my chair in front of my TV. I had always loved playing video games and found them to be an excellent coping mechanism for my depressive episodes. I turned on my game system and started playing, yet this only lasted a few minutes as well. I promptly shut down the system shut the system off, and stare listlessly into the black screen and see my reflection staring back, though it's difficult to recognize myself. I thought maybe because it's literally challenging to see myself on the screen, but I realized that it is more so that the image does not come into focus for me. I cannot seem to really recognize much of anything around me, so my mind wanders into feelings of pure muted despair. I vaguely post about having depression on my social media. I receive a text message from a close friend, one of the ones who suggested that I do something to curtail my depression, asking, "Travis, what is wrong? What are you doing to help yourself?" I respond, "I try to do everything. I try to do the things that help. I try playing guitar, I try writing, I try playing games. Nothing works anymore. These things don't make me happy anymore." So I believe it would be strange to have a conversation on depression without regarding its supposed antithesis, happiness. Right, ironically, looking at happiness in relation to depression and the self is incredibly useful for describing both phenomena. This is mostly because of how discourse surrounding happiness involves a significant amount of seemingly contradictory statements and prescription of performative acts. In Sarah Ahmed's book, The Promise of Happiness, she describes how positive psychology discourses has attempted to define happiness, or rather suggest avenues for obtaining happiness. Feelings associated with happiness are also the method for obtaining happiness. Ahmed notes, "You might note here that the correlation happiness with optimism and happiness with altruism quickly translate into causalities in which happiness becomes its own cause. Happiness is not just individual feeling, but an instrument or a means to an end, as well as the end. With this framework, we are constantly performing acts of which the act in itself is both the end goal and the start. Happiness is maximizing your potential of getting what you want, as well as being what you want to get. These descriptions of happiness play directly into what I term performative emotionality. It's not that one simply feels happy, but is rendered intelligible only through those acts that showcase happiness. I try to convey the overwhelming sense of despair I feel at being unproductive. In this depressed episode, there are two processes that I analyze and see happening concurrently. The first process is the attempt to wrestle with how happiness is considered an a priori good. The positive psychology discourse has often suggested that happiness is associated with those traits we deem morally righteous. A happy person is less self-serving, and this altruism is supposed to be infectious. I cannot say that I'm happy by laying in my bed or wasting away. There must be a process of becoming happy. This becoming is meant to accumulate enough social capital to justify to myself that I am worthy and a good person or fitting the cultural model of goodness. This, of course, is an affective notion of constructing the self, right? So affect is both transitive and reflexive. It allows for the manipulation of thoughts and feelings, those personal responses to outside phenomena, to create specific context or social space. Right? Relaying to my friends that I'm not feeling happy prompts a response that I need to become happy, and this becoming is a maximizing my total goodness. The response creates an effective attachment to my sense of self. What happens if I cannot produce happiness? I feel even more despair. My lack of productivity is seen as intrinsically harmful to myself and others as what is good is then contested by overwhelming melancholic feelings which are bad. My relationship to myself is much like the blurriness I saw on that television screen. I am rendered nearly unintelligible as a moral or good actor within the system of positive affectation, and there's only an unfocused desperation. The second process is the performative emotionality or affect of depression. A performative is that discursive practice that enacts or produces that which it names. Happiness is a feeling, but it's also doing of that feeling. My experiences with depression have been more than just a feeling, but the practice of that feeling, which then creates zones of intelligibility. Depressive acts align individuals on the borders of morality, and consequently reproduce happy/moral subjects. My inability to not do the act that is supposed to make me happy immediately defines the act. Depression, then, is the embodied regulatory practice of those performances that act in opposition to the cultural notions of happiness. Starting our next narrative, we'll try to speed up a little bit more too. This one's called Be Yourself, right? So I don't remember what time it was when I woke up. I had fallen asleep the previous night, maybe around 9:30 or 10 p.m. I should probably note that I used the phrase fallen asleep very loosely, because more realistically, I just laid down on the floor and stared aimlessly into the ceiling. The nights were bad times. They were the times I felt most isolated. On that hard floor, I started crying. And honestly, I was crying over multiple things, but the catalyst to the waterworks was a passing thought of an ex-romantic partner. It happened months prior to the day of me crying on the floor, but the feeling still lingered as if it were happening in the present. They had broken up with me because of my lack of communication. I cited my depression as the reason for not communicating, but that didn't seem to matter. The response was, I don't ever see you do anything to make yourself happy, Travis. You're not doing anything, you're not talking to me, you're not being yourself, and I can't do this anymore. All I could think about as I was laying on the hard concrete floor crying was that I wasn't good enough, and I'm not enough. I'll never be enough for anyone. I'll always have depression. I will fall back into this intense isolation again. I woke the next morning, did my normal morning routine, and began to head to university, Georgia State University. That morning I had the previous night's feelings still fresh within my head. I stood on the curb waiting for a crosswalk to give me a clear to start walking. I stood there and watched the oncoming bus about to drive through the green light. I thought to myself then, I could do it. I could jump right in front of this bus and I could end it all. The bus does sound painful though. I remember hearing that hanging yourself is too slow, so I don't know if I want that either. But if I can find a way, I never have to feel bad again. And my thoughts were cut off by a swelling in my throat. My eyes started to burn, and I realized I was on the verge of tears. The thought of killing myself had caused me some distress, possibly at the thought of pain in the absence of experiences I genuinely enjoyed. I then thought to myself, one day I won't cry at my suicidal ideations, and that's the day I know I'll be able to do it. I thought to myself many times that during my depressive episode that I was being hyper-irrational, and that any suicidal ideation was the illogical conclusion to this hyper-irrationality. Emily Martin kind of suggests that what it means to be rational or irrational depends on the notions of personhood. What notions of personhood are in play, notions that must be understood in their cultural context. Martin notes that the Western self has normatively been the individual, right? The notion of the individual suggests that actors have complete agency. This agency should be asserted always. Western discourse have valorized this idea of the individual and is now the model by which we filter intelligibility of the self and other individuals in the West. And by the West, I mean like the U.S. right now. So Western discourse attempts to reorient individuals to prevailing models of the self through affective attachments. The liberal notion of the individual and positive psychology both reinforce each other in creating and sustaining their respective model. Right? Being a happy person or in the state of becoming a happy person is a rigid defining and constructing of the Western self. The Western self, though, does not allow for expression of these emotions that cannot be controlled, and thus affective and mediation. Individuals consistently, through affective mediation, individuals consistently attempt to reorient the transgressors into the positive and psychological self. Right? My sense of self is also fragmented as I continue to wrestle with expectations of being an individual in control of my emotions, yet also perform these emotions. I'm going to end on this last little thing because I know I'm a little bit over time, but you know. So last narrative is called I Think of Ending It Now. So I sat down in my chair in my office room and I decided to pull up YouTube. I knew I had a lot of work that was due, but I could barely send an email to work. How was I supposed to write a 10 to 15 page paper? I watched a YouTuber that I typically found funny, and I was able to get some amusement out of this, and I started smiling. I had smiled all morning of the previous day, so this was refreshing. I started to watch more YouTube content, and I felt confident enough to finally speak to my friends that I isolated myself from for a couple of days. We sent each other ironic and nonsensical memes, a brand of comedy I enjoy quite a bit. I went to class, be able to speak and be my jocular self, or at least the self that people know me as. I went home that day being able to sing my favorite songs in the car and dance all the way. I was able to start writing that night. I could be productive finally. It was 10 p.m. almost exactly when I suddenly stopped writing and seized with that familiar feeling of despair. I did my usual coping. I went to my room, I collapsed on the floor, I slowly cried myself to sleep, wondering where to call in. Right? So, just to quickly conclude, this project aimed to show depression is oriented into Western notions of the self and how we can explore the idea of the self through affective attachment. This paper became an exercise, an experiment in placing anthropological gaze upon myself. There are multiple times where I could not continue writing, had to take regular breaks because the writing my story of depression became too difficult. I thought that I could find something therapeutic in writing up these musings on affect, but in the end, I still struggle with lasting despair and erratic thoughts. I finished writing my analysis and looked up at the same television that I couldn't see myself any more clearer than I had before. It was all still blurry and unfocused. The self is constantly shifting through the context in which it exists. It is sometimes clear and focused or rendered intelligible, and other times it is blurry and unrecognizable. The blurriness is defined and shaped, and then shaped to intelligibility. Reorient the self through recognition, through practice, and try to wash away the blur. And that's it. That's all I got for you.
Thank you so much, Travis. All right, so next up we have Rachel Watford. Rachel will be presenting her thesis work on lion dancing. So welcome, Rachel.
On lion dance in the U.S., specifically looking at the pan-ethnicity of it and how performance arts is used to identify with culture and race. So my objectives for this thesis was who is performing lion dance in the U.S. and why are they performing it. I was also interested in the symbolisms of lion dance and whether or not these symbolic things shifted from team to team or if they was pretty much similar across the U.S. And I was also interested in the direction that lion dance is heading because it's really sped up in the past few years and no one really knows where it's going. So yeah. Okay. Cool. So a little background on how I actually got into lion dancing. I was first introduced to it when I was in the Navy. One of my Chinese teachers played a video of it and I was like, oh, this is really cool, really beautiful. And that was in 2003. And I didn't get a chance to actually perform it until 2014 when I just randomly came across this group in Denver. And they invited me to join and took me in as another family member, and I've been working with them ever since. And these are two different performances that took place, one in 2014 where I was a lion, and then the other in 2018 where I was the photographer for that performance. I have two videos that will show what lion dance looks as a sport versus what it looks like as a tradition. And it also shows two different styles, Hoksan and Fatsan. Hoksan style is newer, it's more acrobatic, it's seen as more cutesy and fun, while Fatsan is older, it's more traditional, it's seen more in martial arts and really expresses a person's martial skill. Let's hope there's some sound. This one is the traditional performance style. And so for both of those videos, I had both teams perform the 3 bows, which is where the lion will bow to the heavens, the earth, and the people to show respect. And the Hoaxon style was a lot more like jumpy and just a lot more movement, while the Fatson style was more grounded. There's also the sporting event when during a championship, there's only one lion. They don't interact with the audience, and it's very technical. It's based on how well their skill is. While the traditional performance, there's a lot of interaction between the performer and the audience. There's a lot of give and take. Lion dances are to scare away bad spirits, which is why there's loud noises and firecrackers, and at the same time giving good luck and good fortune to the audience who are there to see them. Oops. Okay, cool. So practices are obviously a big deal with lion dancing because you need to learn how to do it. Where am I at in here? And also it gives you a chance to see what they look like underneath the costume. It's very repetitive. You just do the same motions over and over and over again, and then you add on to it, and that's how you learn, because everything is done by word of mouth and through demonstration. Nothing is written down. You're told how to do it, and then you repeat it. There's also lion dance groups have to find a way to turn space into a practice place. So when I first joined, we were actually practicing outside a closed down department store underneath an awning, which is this right here. And there were many times where we finished our practice and we would hear people clapping because they watched the entire thing. And we would realize this is no longer a private space, but it was actually public the entire time. They now are practicing inside a warehouse, and we still get weird looks, as the warehouse is mainly where people will go to work on their cars and stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, but if you want to do this, they find a way to do it. So quick overview of symbolisms. As I said, like there's a lot of give and take, a lot of reciprocity. So in this top picture here, there's a red envelope being given to the lion, and inside the envelope will have money, which people will give to the lion to eat, and with that you're supposed to get back more money. Lions will also have scrolls that they have at the end of the shows that again will give good luck and fortune to the people who watch it. The two photos in the middle of our eye dotting ceremony, which is pretty much, so it brings life into the lion and tames it, and it's a very big part of lion dancing culture, as it's very bad luck to dance with a lion who has not gone through this. Yeah. So who performs lion dancing? So majority of the lion dancers are of Chinese and Vietnamese descent, and Asian Americans. There were also non-Asian Americans. Majority of those people are part of martial arts groups in schools. Everyone who performs it, they have told me that they do it for fun, to promote the culture, to preserve the culture, and that it's just, and because the traditions are really interesting. One of the most interesting guys is the guy in the pink all the way over to, I guess your right. He's a Hmong American, and lion dance doesn't exist in Hmong culture, so he is trying to introduce it to his culture. And he's hoping to be the first person to introduce lion dance to Hmong culture. And who are the audience? Let's see. So majority of the audience are Asian Americans and immigrants who have moved to the US, and they hire line dance groups to perform in order to get the good luck and the good fortune. They perform at a lot of festivals and events that promote culture and heritage. They get hired to perform at grand openings for restaurants and businesses and such, which again is to promote a lot of money. Like, clients come, dance, you're supposed to get a lot of money back, like a lot of good luck for the businesses. They also engage in community work where they will go to heritage camps and such and teach this tradition to the children. And so, big part of my thesis is the United States Dragon and Line Dance Federation, which was created in 2016 by the president and vice president, the two top guys, who met with the two people of the International Federation, and they wanted a group that would be able to help preserve and promote the dance as a cultural tradition and sport, but also create opportunities for all styles to express and develop through friendly regional, national, and international training and exchanges and quality tournaments with high standards. The first national championship happened last May, and that's the opening ceremony. During that time, 22 groups from all over the country participated in it, and they see line dance as becoming a strong, vibrant part of the American culture that engages in multi-generational and multicultural individuals. Many groups are afraid that the creation of this federation is going to speed up the homogenization of the art, but it's still incredibly early to really tell if that will happen or not. So, where is line dance going to go? As it right now looks like, line dance is growing and becoming more involved in the US. Groups are working together to teach each other and learn from each other and to work together, but at the same time, we really don't know. It could become something where it grows up and then falls back down. But I feel like this video really signifies the direction that the community hopes it goes in. And we don't play, maybe. Or not. Yeah.
The dinner mode?
No, thank you.
And then you're probably going to drag it. Let's see, where did it open? Oh, my God, wouldn't put it back. Well, I think we're all listening and you can help. I think it really.
What's going on, guys? Today we are heading out to Boston. That's right.
We've not just is it? I'll get a big.
questions. So actually, presenters, if you would like to come back up to the front for our question and answer session, that would be wonderful.
Do you guys just want to quickly say your name and your, like, what your work was on really quick so people remember? Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Swartkrons, caves, and the experimental test on the bone tools.
Michaela, I did mine on museum collaboration or community collaboration down in Mexico.
It's not what we.
Rachel, line dancing in the U.S.
That's Travis. I did the thing on the freshman.
So I got a question for Michaela. So what were the kids talking about when you actually started discussing this over the...
So they, it's hard to tell sometimes because they would just like crowd you and ask you like what type of goodies you had. But some of the kids that were surrounding Nathania were really interested. She had the remote control, so they were like watching as like on the remote where the drone was flying, and then they would look up and try and like map out its path. And then when they were around me, they were mostly interested in the maps that were out on our proposal, which I also have if people are interested. And they're like, oh cool, this is where my house is, and that looks like my dad, and like, oh, that's my uncle's business. So they would ask all sorts of questions about like who we were and why we were down there, and why we were interested in the museum project, and like, what's the point, which is kind of surprising for little kids, but I mean, they're pretty smart.
So were they actually interested in the idea of this heritage and archaeology?
Some of them were. There were a couple girls who asked me for more information, but these kids were only about, I think the range is like 6 to 12 years old. They were more interested in hearing what Nathania was doing with the drone remote than they were about seeing a proposal, but I did get a few kids who like leafed through it and did actually read it. Yeah.
Michaela, were any of them some of the kids that had come out 2 years ago and seen us when we were excavating? Did any of them say that? Because we had all the schools come out and visit us while we were in the field.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We only had that one kid who admitted to his brother selling a drone that he stole.
Different story.
Yes.
So kind of given what, because I thought it was really interesting, right, that you highlighted how excited the kids got.
Yeah.
And so as you guys have been working on this proposal, like, I was wondering how you're thinking about the museum as like an educational tool for, you know, like primary age children. Like, is that, and you've had conversations with teachers and stuff, right? So how are you incorporating that, like, very explicit educational mission?
So I wasn't really able to go into it in too much detail, but we did get a chance to meet with each of the directors of the 3 schools that are in Chiquila. You have the Primaria, which is ages 6 through 12, which is the little kids. The Secundaria, which is, 12 through like 15 or something. And then I always butcher this name, but it's like the Bachillera or something, where it's 15 through 18 years old. And we met with each of those directors and the subdirector of the Primaria. And what we're trying to do, although the project is really in its initial stages right now, we're just trying to garner support right now. We are beginning discussions with the directors to sort of see the type of content that could be useful to their curriculum, because the museum does have a lot of potential as this sort of like a field trip type of day for schools, and depending on the type of content that we do have would be very beneficial in educating some of the kids who don't know that, you know, Vista Alegre or Conil or a slew of other archaeological sites are actually out there, or the type of information that we are coming out with in, you know, Dr. Glover's PCE project or other investigations, or even some of the stories that we're getting orally from a few of the older gentlemen in the community and their wives. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's also, right, there's the space with the playground.
Yeah.
That, you know, from the get-go, we've sort of put forth as a spot for some more interactive type exhibits that's super vague because we don't know what exactly it might be, but that's like definitely there's a spot for some outdoor interactive activities.
Yeah, but the process is long and it's like really long, and you know what ends up happening in this space will depend a lot on what people are really interested in actually seeing there. So yeah.
I have a question for Travis.
Yeah.
Kind of about the intentions of your work, and I know you kind of said like in the end it didn't really help you to see yourself clearer, but like is there any hope of like using it to further the conversation that we're having about depression and how to talk about it or to deal with it, or?
Yeah, so my purpose in saying that was like I think like part of what I was writing it was supposed to be kind of therapeutic, and it wasn't. Like it actually made things a lot worse. But because I was constantly like having to relive like every moment of my life. But mostly, what I did, my intention were to kind of create this like maybe more nuanced discussion of how we talk about things like depression or happiness or like really these like ideas of emotion, because I think we kind of understand them from these like these very biomedical or like you know psychological like ideas of like, oh, like I feel happy or I feel depressed or like I feel sad, like that's kind of like this innate thing. And my kind of contention to that was that like it's not really, and so it was to kind of add a little more nuance to that discussion a bit. That makes sense.
I had a follow-up question. I was wondering if any of there's been some work in different social sciences surrounding this idea of happiness as an end goal, or the idea that the opposite of happy is sad and vice versa. And you know, and in some ways taking on this idea of happiness cross-culturally as the steady state that you're supposed to aspire to.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you've incorporated, you know, or reflected on those things in terms of your own work, because it was, I mean, I was thinking about that while you were doing your paper.
Yeah, so so some of the stuff I do on the side or whatever is like political economy work, and looking at how like, so one of the pretenses for these happy narratives and these discourses is to try and create these very stable subjects to kind of you know, reinforce like capitalist or liberal, like neoliberal like ideas of like consumption, and that kind of model is being used like globally, right? And so I think it does have that intention of like kind of creating like, or curating this capitalocentric like kind of logic across like the globe or whatever. So yes, but not, but that's kind of more stuff that I'm looking for in the future. Probably not like right now.
It's interesting too, because you know, in terms of the, you know, what counselors and therapists would say, do things that make you happy, and often the doing of those things, requires action, which again is this whole other thing. But then also, you know, I noticed it involved products, right? So it was guitar, it was video games, it was TV, it was, you know, using the phone, and yes, so I think that is an interesting point for tying into the way that might get reinforced with well-meaning therapeutic processes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something I didn't really touch on too much, and just because of like time and length and whatnot. But yeah, this idea of having to tie like happiness, these acts, not only is it like kind of this doing of the act, which kind of requires you to be happy to begin with. It's very tautological in that effect, right? But like but it also requires you to like have the catalyst of something to do it with. Whereas, you know, and that kind of like this consuming is like how we kind of code morality. If you consume, you are better or you're good, or if you don't, you're not like good, and things like that. I think that's that does definitely get reinforced, especially like when we kind of like talk about like prescribing like medications and stuff like that. It's I think where you kind of do the conversation of like, you know, prescribing like these products, these like, you know, whatever pills or whatever, and they kind of, that is like a product you have to like consume to be like a better, like happier person. Whereas like I think my kind of intention once again is kind of to like look at that and show like how that has a lot of like faults into it, and very lot of contradictory logic that I'm not particularly fond of. You know, yeah.
Okay. I have a question for Sarah.
Yeah.
I guess really I would like to understand more about the research that you're doing as far as like these bone tools go, and like what is that, like what is the aim of looking into this?
So when they were discovered, like I kind of mentioned, it was kind of curious because we didn't really know at the discovery of Paranthropus robustus if they were able to use tools. You know, that's a big deal when it comes to analyzing trends within human evolution. So the ability to use tools is a huge deal because that correlates with bipedalism, you know, walking on two legs, frees up your hands, it allows you to do a couple of other things, you know. It also opens your ability to have a much wider diet option because if you have tools, you can access a lot more different types of foods. So that's kind of why these were so interesting, because then once we figured out that these were tools used to reach foods, we could understand further the kinds of foods that they were accessing, the kinds of foods they could have possibly been eating, and then you can tie their diet into a plethora of other things that lead us to understand Paranthropus robustus a lot more. And so anything we can understand about them is greatly encouraged, because then we can understand our lineage a little bit more. And so that's why it was very important.
Actually, to follow up on that, I was curious, does this change like the whole idea of like the robustus sort being more marginal? Because now you have like evidence of protein and all these kinds of other consumption.
Right. So recently, some of the literature that I've been reviewing, especially even at the AAPAs, there was a big push to understand that Paranthropus, as a genus, ate a lot more meats and proteins than we had originally thought. So the ability to access these termites is just a small portion. Now that we know that they were eating like wild game, they were being able to access the just tons of new foods. So yes, it definitely changes a lot of things. And they were living synonymously with early Homo, so they were kind of accessing somewhat similar food sources. So neat stuff.
I have a question for Rachel and Shrimp. Rachel, you said you got interested in lion dancing when you were in the Navy. Were you actually in China or close to an Asian country, or were you here? You said it, but I didn't hear you.
So when I joined the Navy, I learned Chinese in Monterey, California, and that's where I learned about lion dance. We went on a field trip to Chinatown in San Francisco during Lunar New Year, so we got to see the parades and see the lions march around the streets. So that's really where I first learned of them, and then it was almost 10 years later that I came across the group's website, and they were like, anyone can join, we'll teach you for free. I said, why not? I wanted to learn this a long time ago, so yeah.
All right. Thank you again so much to our presenters. We're going to take a break now for our poster session, so thank you everyone. Please feel free to get a refreshments, dessert, grab a refill on your tea and coffee, and we'll do our poster sessions. For being back on time, we appreciate you. So we're going to continue with our presentations, and next up we have Mohammed Obayador Rahman. He will be speaking with us today about his experience as a United Nations peacekeeper. So welcome, Obayad.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for a nice introduction. In fact, this is a rare opportunity for me to share my experience on the United Nations peacekeeping operations. I'm here in the Anthropology department for the last 1.5 years, and the only one thing I can say that there were many options for me to choose in any of the department of this great university. But what I thought that anthropology, what does it mean really? Because I had no idea. But after 1.5 years, I can very confidently say that what is being taught here by the respected professors, by the faculties, by the students we interact, by the books we read, is the same notions which we have learned in the UN peacekeeping operations. Okay, having said that, I had a golden opportunity to work in the 2 United Nations mission, one in Iraq and Kuwait in 2001 and 2002. I was both in Kuwait City and in Baghdad for 1 year. And that was I was putting on without any arms. I was in almost in a civilian cloth, and we used to be a neutral body there. And lastly, I was operating in the Ivory Coast and the Liberia, especially in the Ivory Coast, where to make the peace process in between the 2 conflicting parties, which was very successful in the as the UN body says. Having said that, the overview of my today's presentation will be unfolded in the manner it has been shown. I will be briefly touching about the brief history of the UN peacekeeping operation, followed by the cultural diversity training in the UN, because I had also had the opportunity to train the UN peacekeeping operation personnel, those who were in the different parts of the globe. After that, I will also cover the UN anthropological perspective, the compared and contrast with the anthropology, and the on-the-ground examples, and the few recommendations. So these are the 3 organizational values. As you can see, the respect for diversity is one of the main themes of UN, and here every person matters. Having said that, it is almost 60 years of the UN peacekeeping operations over the globe. Wherever there is a conflict, the UN tried to be a neutral body and go there and try to manipulate so that the peace does exist in the world. So in the early years, UN peacekeepers were mainly soldiers, and mainly they were Europeans and the male. But over the years today, as you can see here, it is from the 120 countries, rich and poor, the small or big, many countries, and the people are coming and joining in the UN peacekeeping operations. And now, it is no more soldiers just. As you can see here, that there are 11,000 police officers, about 5,000 the international civilians with expertise in areas such as the human rights, security sector reforms, elections, logistics, child protection, HIV/AIDS, and the gender issues, and more than 11,000 civilian staffs. So I will, in the later form, when I will talk about the employment for the anthropologists in the UN peacekeeping operations, here I want to remind you that here the thing you can see that 5,000 international civilians, I think without expertise in the places where it has been shown human rights, security sector reform, elections, logistics, blah, 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 there are many, many other places where we can really contribute with our knowledges. Just I will show in a very quick form the UN learning outcomes. What the UN says about the diversity. And at the last, I will also say what we say diversity and the UN, does it really matter? Does it really compare and contrast? They describe how cultural difference and the different kinds of diversity might be evident in the mission environment, and especially in the host country, because every host country is different, every area is multicultural. So this is the main theme of today. In the UN, what is diversity? It's in fact the variety, the multitude of information. So I will not spoil the times here, because I will just quickly go through that what UN looks about the diversity. They say that in fact this is the core that by which a man can be distinguished from others, who I am really. And then these are the things like age and all these things. We don't have any choice. And the third, in the color you can see here, they are the geographic location where you choose to be, and probably the culture of that place does go inside you somehow or other. and finally this one. So these are the, in fact, dimensions of diversity. But we have to remember, rather the UN says that UN personnel should remember that we can see only 10% of a human being. The rest of the 90% we cannot see. Why we cannot see? Because, like the iceberg analogy, that if we do not understand the 90% and have an overview, that like a boat of Titanic, we can have a conflict. These are the things we can really see that is obvious. But the 90%, we cannot see these other things. As per the UN training, these all are the, as you can see here, it is UN pre-deployment training standards, or the PDT, it was pre-deployment training. It was in 2009, but many slides are of today after the anthropology class, but I did not change that one intentionally, just to give a historical background that we are with this type of process from that 2009. So the UN core values are we have to treat so this is the cross-cultural communication process. What does it mean really? Ademola?
It means no.
No. But believe me, it is yes in some other country. That is the language. So this means yes in Sri Lanka and also in Albania.
What? I missed that. What? Can you say that? I missed. What was the question?
Well, I asked that, what does it mean? He said no, but this means yes in some of the countries of the world.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So I have only 5 minutes, so quickly I go to the last slide. Okay. This is the picture, the experiences of mine, as you can see here, that we were there with the village chiefs of that area, Man. This is the northern portion of the Ivory Coast, where all the chiefs of different conflicting tribes were together with us, had a luncheon with us, and we had a peaceful settlement after that. This is the last slide. So the first one is the international civilians with expertise in the different areas. I want to ponder on this point, that the after the anthropological research, after the ethnography, after this emic and ethic, your expression, your research, probably this is the place where we can learn more about the UN core values, which is the respect for the diversity. I know many questions will come that what UN is doing here and there and this thing negative, but or positive. But these are the slides I tried to show that these are the training given to the personnel so that they do not deviate from the original point of view. And the same thing probably is in the anthropology, which has been told, especially in the American anthropology, from the Boas by the Ruth Benedict, who said in the cultural pattern that we see, we never see anything in the pristine eyes. In fact, it is we wear a colored glass, and we always see why from our own values we pattern the culture. So that is very important, and we don't have to give the judgmental view about anything, good or bad, because we have to look to a culture as a whole. So this is the cultural relativism I wanted to ponder on. And first, the scope for us in this sector. So scope for us in this sector, it is, I think, this is a wide scope for the anthropologists, especially in the mission area. I can just confidently say that it's very much rewarding to work in the United Nations as peacekeeper, because this really gives you an experience to work in different parts of the globe. You do meet multicultural people. You have, every day you speak in a couple of languages. Every day you are nearer to thousands of different actions by the different, which you think it is bad, but on the ground you see it is bad, and otherwise. So I think the same thing which recently I see in the department while entering, that there is a poster that the human differences, to make the safety, anthropology makes it safe for the human differences. I think the same thing the UN is trying to do. And with this message, I want to conclude my today's speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Obaid. So next up we have Mohammed Asad-Ujjaman, who will be speaking to us. Asad will be speaking to us today about his work looking at refugee health here in Atlanta. So welcome, Asad.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome to everybody. This is my thesis topic, and I'm going to present my that topic is health-seeking behavior of refugee people. Especially, I am doing my research on Rohingya ethnic community who are living in Atlanta. Especially, they are living in Clarkston, and sorry for technical disturbance. So first I'm going to who are refugees. According to UNHCR, you know that people who are fled from their original country or reason of, there are many reasons they are belonging their race, religion, nationality, and membership of a particular social groups, and they are not able to protect them. Also, the state don't want to protect them. And who are Rohingya refugees? And Rohingya refugees, they have a different ethnicity. They are Muslim ethnic community living in Rakhine state of Myanmar, and almost right now they are living 1/3 people right now in Rakhine state according to 2017 data, and others people almost 3.5 million Rohingya refugees displaced in the world. And you know that in Bangladesh there is the largest Rohingya refugees camp. Almost 1.3 million people right now are living in Bangladesh, and they are forced to leave home by brutal military regime. And according to Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies, the Rohingyas are one of the most vulnerable populations in the world by reckoning. So, study population, I am in here, especially in Atlanta, and according to 2018 refugee processing data, almost 20,000 Burmese Muslim people are living in USA right now. And in the Atlanta metropolitan area, most of the Rohingya refugees living in Clarkston, and according to Rohingya refugees representative, and almost 150 family and almost over the 450 individual people are living in Clarkston. Rohingya people are living in here. So my research questions, broadly my objectives is that how health issues are negotiated by Rohingya refugee people. And my specific research question is that how do Rohingya refugees living in Clarkston, Georgia perceive health? And another one is how does their refugee status influence their health-seeking behavior? So my research methods, doing my research with that methods, I have interviewed almost 15 individual Rohingya peoples who are, there is almost age limit is 20 to 50, and another one is case study and also I did 2 key informant interview. 2 respondents, they are almost living here that over the 5 years, and also they are community leader also, and observations because I was one of the volunteer of one of the refugee organizations, World Refugee Center. That time I introduced with them, and I observed a lot of things is that, and when I visited their home, when I visited their Rohingya Education and Community Center for my interview, and autoethnography itself because of that. Also, I did my health problems, and I deal my health problems with hospitals, doctors, and also my experience I put it in my research. So, first things is that health perceptions of Rohingya refugees. So, I'm looking health perceptions with that lenses that access of healthcare systems in here, that how they are accessing healthcare systems in here, that, and I saw that when they came here that the refugee settlement or body from their state providing the 8 months health insurance facilities. After that, they lost that, and when someone just lost their health insurance and didn't get any type of job, and most of the Rohingya people and Rohingya refugees don't get any kind of insurances. So that time they're seeking the healthcare facilities from some volunteer organizations, and they go to the pick them, and also the perceptions like that, and also I observed that people when came in the volunteer organizations, they are just trying to pick up that appointment because they don't know the English language, one of the barrier that was there. And another thing is that health consciousness regarding food and daily life. So when they lived in their origin of country, Burma or whatever it is in Thailand refugee camps, that time they did not aware about that their food style, food habit, lifestyle that. But when they came here, that they know that they need to take insurance, health insurance, that they need to go to the hospital and they need to expense more money from their pocket. So that time they are more aware than their than first time. So that things is most important that, and one of the informant told me that like that whatever it is we are habituated with that rice and breaded other things is that, but right now we need to know that what type of nutritional factors contain that type of foods, because I need to always aware about my health, and because of if I am sick, I need to go to the hospitals and I need to expense more money from my pocket. So that's why they always trying to keep their healthy. And community support groups, and when they visited their community center, they're discussing with others how can they keep their, how they can get some facilities from other organizations, where they can go for their treatment, when they can go, where they can go to for the appointments. So that type of community supports and community groups also providing some information about health insurance, healthcare systems, other sort of things is that. And complications related language and differences, you know that big troubles for refugee people is language. So when they are just trying to get some health facilities from hospitals, most of the refugees faces that barriers because they can't speak English and they don't understand what doctors providing some information or instructions about their health, they don't understand anything. So another thing is financial burden, and one of the informant just like informed like that. So when I was at my home country, that time we didn't have any kind of tensions because of how I'm sick, I need to go to the doctor, I didn't need any kind of appointment. And sometimes when I'm lived in refugee camps, most of the volunteer organizations providing free healthcare, free Medicaid. So I didn't get any type of trouble for that about the money, about the cost. But right now in here, always I'm thinking about the cost, about the money. There's the another things they perceive their health like that from the aspects of financial things is that. So the most important part of my research is health-seeking behavior of Rohingya refugees. I'm going to say that with the 5 points: resettlements of Rohingya refugees and health settings, perceptions of disease, illness, and sickness, healthcare barriers of Rohingya refugees, self-medicating, the use of traditional medicine, and learning of new medical system. First, resettlement of Rohingya refugees and health settings. When they moved from the refugee camps, Thailand or Malaysia, when they came here, that the authority of resettlement in here providing some guideline, providing also the health insurance for 8 months, and but after that they need to do that by self. So that time, but they are not skilled with language, they are not skilled, they have not much more money. Most of the people didn't get any type of job. That time they feel a lot of obstacle for getting healthcare. So resettlement organizations are sometimes underfunded, understaffed, and are not always able to provide the necessary attentions that refugees require during their resettlement transitions. So they are doing some regular activity, but not looking more in-depth way to the refugee people. So perceptions of disease and illness, and Rohingya refugees in Clarkston, when they moved from other refugee camps, so this is a new society, new culture. So here they feel and they face a lot of things is that. So that's why in here, this is the different circumstances. So one of the informant stated like that, flu is a very big thing in here, and everybody going to the hospital for sure. But when I lived in my home country or other refugee camps, that doesn't matter things is that. They didn't get any type of shot, any type of Medicaid. They just self-healing systems, but here they need to take that type of things. So they need to, their perceptions is going to be something different from their past experiences. So healthcare barriers of Rohingya refugees, and I'm finding the 3 things is most importantly: language, transportation, insurance cost, and cost of healthcare. So language is a big thing for their, one of the barriers of Rohingya refugees because of that. When they came here, that they don't know how to speak English, they don't know how to deal with their health problems with the doctors and with the health providers. So that's why every moment they feel a lot of problems in the every stage in their getting healthcare and other things also. That transportation is one of the big things is that most of the people, they didn't get any type of job most of the time, almost 2 years, 1 year, and they feel a lot of trouble that. So in here that, so transportations, it's not available, and they didn't get access to Uber, Lyft, because it's costly also. So they need to wait a lot of time for buses, for MARTA. So they feel one of the obstacles. That's why they are always trying to avoid going to the doctors, going to the hospitals, and when they're sick, they are trying to medicate by self. And insurance and the cost of healthcare is the big things is that. So refugees people always trying to overcome that problems. And when they are getting sick, most of the people trying to healing by self, or they don't want to go to the hospital because they know that if I'm going to the hospitals, insurance cost like that copay, that's the big things. We know that $30 is not much more, most of the US people, most of the US native people, but for refugee peoples is the big things, because $30 is a big thing. That's why they don't want to expense like that money. Self-medicating, one of the things is that, and most of the people trying to self-medicate here, and because of they don't want to face that problems, and a lot of problems also I mentioned here that, and use of traditional medicine and the learning the new medical systems. So still they are trying to use their traditional medicine for different reasons. So they are trying to avoid a lot of obscure systems, especially in US medical systems. They are trying to avoid the hazardness. They are trying to their language barriers. So that's why they are trying to, first they want to use their traditional medicines for recover their health problems. And some people prefer natural remedies instead of Western medical medicines because they are used to most of the time from their home country, from the past refugee camps. So because they believe that traditional medicines or the natural remedies will be helpful for their health instead of Western medical systems or Western biomedical medicine. And another thing is that most of the refugees feeling uncomfortable because when they want to go to the hospitals, they need to speak English. That time they're feeling uncomfortable. When they want to go to the hospital, they know that they need to pay more money. When they want to go to the hospital and the health provider asks them, do you have insurance? And most of the time they need to say that, oh no, I have no insurance. So that's why they're feeling uncomfortness about that things. So that's why they are trying to avoid getting the US healthcare systems, US healthcare. So in conclusion, I want to say like that, encounter numerous barriers of healthcare services, refugee people, things like that. And one of the most important things I am finding that US healthcare systems make it challenges to them, except the new Western biomedical systems. And one of the informants saying like that, yes, the Western biomedical system, so in here, US medical system is very good. So treatment is very good, but the system is very difficult. So that's why that is the big challenges for them. So how they can get that, how they can face that challenges. And they face language barriers and difficulties taking healthcare services also. Also, I have mentioned that. And finally, as a refugee, language barriers, obscure health insurance and healthcare systems, and cultural differences shift their health perceptions and health-seeking behavior in the USA. Already I have mentioned that, and how they are feeling a lot of obstacle, and how they are going that journey for their healthcare with their obscure systems. And you know that refugee people, they are vulnerable people, especially Rohingya refugee people, and still it's going on with them. And almost 3.5 million people living different refugee camps, especially I want to mention here that Bangladesh, almost 1.3 million Rohingya refugees living there, and they're feeling a lot of obstacles. There is no very good health systems, and still I'm doing my research in here that in here and the first world, USA, also in here, they're feeling a lot of obstacles. They face a lot of obstacles with their healthcare systems, with their getting health facilities. So I hope so it would be fine if everybody can find out their problems and going to provide them the easy way to get the health systems. Thank you so much.
Ok, so, olá, me chamo Alexis e hoje eu vou conversar com vocês sobre música feminista no Brasil e a identidade de mulheres, especificamente em termos de feminismo, sexualidade e comunidade negra. So basically what I said was, my name's Alexis, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about feminist music in Brazil and its effects on women's identity in terms of feminism, sexuality, and blackness. So, music as a means of political expression is not a new phenomenon. For decades, music has been used to combat inequalities, such as in the 1900s for labor strikes, and the 1960s in opposition of war, and was especially powerful in regards to the civil rights movement. The 1960s and 70s in Brazil were the heyday of the Tropicalia movement, led by Brazilian music artists Gilberto Gil and Caetano Veloso, specifically in opposition to an oppressive military regime. Music has been particularly important to feminism, starting with the use of popular songs, adapted soldier songs, and hymns by the women's suffrage movement. And in the mid-1990s to early 2000s, third wave women's rap was an important part of women's sexual liberation, with artists like Missy Elliott and Lil' Kim discussing female sexual pleasure quite regularly. While there's been literature about feminism, sexuality, blackness, and music in Brazil separately, there has yet to be literature that covers these themes' interconnectedness, at least not with the focus of research being women. My research, in which I focused on learning more about the part popular Brazilian music plays in the construction of Brazilian women's identities from the perspectives of both Brazilian women and men, aims to fill these gaps during a time of change within Brazilian music, as female musicians are beginning to talk about each of these topics and their intersections, all while under a political regime that is attempting to limit the agency of women and even going so far as vowing to remove the topic of feminism and the LGBT movement from school curriculum. So my research questions were, how is feminism constructed in Brazil? How is feminism portrayed in Brazilian music? And how do Brazilian musicians use music to combat normative ideas? My research methods were pretty simple, close to a decade of participant observation, as I've been visiting Brazil for almost 10 years, semi-structured interviews that were all conducted with Brazilian citizens, all of them but one was conducted in Brazilian Portuguese. These 6 interviews ranged from roughly 30 minutes to 2 hours, and 2 of the interviews were completed in the United States, while 4 were completed in Brazil. The 2 interviews completed in the United States were with a Brazilian citizen on vacation, and the other was a Brazilian citizen with resident status in the United States. Of the interviews in Brazil, 1 was completed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and the other 3 were completed in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais. I had 2 distinct interview guides, one for music consumers and one for music creators, though unfortunately only one of my participants was a music creator. I also completed media analysis through analysis of lyrics and music videos. So I had 6 participants, 4 of which self-identified as women, 2 self-identifying as branca or white, 1 self-identifying as parda, or what can be understood as brown or mixed, and 1 self-identifying as negra or black. 2 of them self-identified as men, with 1 self-identifying as white and 1 self-identifying as black. My participants ranged in age from 18 to 34 and came from a variety of backgrounds. And this slide is just showing the locations that I mentioned on this slide of my participants. So my theoretical framework, I based my research in the theory of citizenship. And when I frame my research in the theory of citizenship, I'm not referring to just citizenship of the nation state of Brazil, I'm also referring to citizenship of individual groups within Brazil itself. So historically, Brazil has created citizenship that on paper is extremely inclusive. However, it has been extremely exclusive in practice, using social differences to distribute different treatment to different people. It thereby generates a gradation of rights among them, in which most rights are available to only a particular kind of citizen and exercised as the privilege of particular social categories. This leads to these inequalities being perpetuated in other ways in Brazilian society. Shane Phelan argues that acknowledgement is an essential part of citizenship. While it's not a right in and of itself, it is the establishment of a political relation. So the enactment of citizenship is the recognition that one has a claim to be heard and responded to, that one should be acknowledged. My research shows a new demand for equality is venturing into private spaces through public insurgency, like commercial music and social media. And all of my components of my research are tied to citizenship and the gradation of rights that Holston talks about. So for example, there are public hospitals in Brazil, however, there are also private hospitals. People in low-income areas have access to the public hospitals, but are also increased wait times for everything from receiving medication or potentially life-saving surgeries, whereas those Brazilians with more money can purchase insurance and have access to the private hospitals. In my interviews, many women discussed the discrimination that they faced on a daily basis. Things like men thinking they weren't capable of doing their job or lifting heavy things. And one of my participants even discussed her experience as a lesbian woman, saying that men would routinely say that she just hadn't had a man who could satisfy her sexually yet, and that she should try having sex with them. The idea of women being passive and the ultimate subservient wife is part of why Brazil has a large incidence of rape and domestic violence. And in these cases, there's often no prosecution of the men committing these acts. It has been documented that men who have murdered their wives take the defense of, but she was going to cheat on me, and the charges get dropped. This shows that women's concerns and claims are not always acknowledged in Brazilian society. This defense is rooted in the perception of female sexuality in Brazil. Brazilian women have long been sex objects, literally since colonization, when the Portuguese saw native Brazilians naked and having sex freely. This idea was only exacerbated by the importation of slaves, because these female slaves were treated as acceptable sexual replacements for Portuguese women who would not arrive in Brazil until later. Even once the Portuguese women did arrive, they were kept in the center of their houses, guarding their virginity, being kept chaste and pure. Slaves were for sex, Portuguese women were for marriage. Jessica Gregg talks about how Brazilian women are expected to be sexy, but not have sex, because virginity is value. Where men are expected to have sex because they're men. If a woman pursues a man and they don't have sex with them, something must be wrong with them. This shows that Brazilian women, and especially Black Brazilian women, are seen as objects and not necessarily autonomous beings. So how is feminism constructed in Brazil? It's historically been exclusive and often perceived as radical. So when feminism emerged in Brazil, it played two roles. Fighting for the reestablishment of democracy after a very long military dictatorship, and fighting to include gender equality as a theme central to that democracy. The 1980s saw a rise of women's issues being included in public policy, but many Black women found that early feminist groups were unwelcoming and at times even hostile to Black women's insistence that feminism should address how the rampant racism in Brazilian society affects constructions of gender. It is this insistence that one form of oppression was no more important than another, that race, class, and gender are all inseparable to shaping of the lives of Black women, that distinguished their struggle from both Black men and white women. During the early 1980s, Black women began to realize that within the male-dominated Black movement and the white-dominated feminist movement, that their needs were not being adequately articulated. They decided racism within the women's movement and sexism within the Black movement required the creation of a movement distinctly for Black women. Some Black women who remained sympathetic to the political assertions of the feminist movement still kept themselves removed from the movement because of its inattention or blatant ignorance to the levels of oppression Black women were facing in terms of class and gender. I asked each of my participants if they identified as a feminist. Each of them said no. Most said no because they thought that feminists believed that women were better than men, and many cited feminists as being radical as another reason for not identifying as a feminist. However, each of them stated that they supported the feminist movement and what it stands for. So how is feminism portrayed in Brazilian music? This is MC Carol, who is a fairly well-known Brazilian artist who lives in Rio de Janeiro, and she has a song called 100% Feminista, in which she talks about witnessing domestic violence and how when she grows up she'll be different, talking about her fragility as a woman, but that fragility doesn't negate her being a strong Black woman. So in a 2017 interview, MC Carol was asked, "You consider yourself a feminist, and many of your lyrics talk about women's empowerment. What do you still want to say to girls who listen to you?" Her response was, "Be independent, always. Fight for the freedom of being whoever you want. Do not give satisfaction to anyone. And if you choose to be married or have children, do it because you want to and not because you think it's your only way." Lei is another Brazilian artist who isn't quite as well known, and she's from the city of São Paulo in the state of São Paulo. She has quotes like, "From the very beginning, people said my EP was aggressive." And that's another thing that goes against this idea of women as being passive in Brazilian society. So in a 2016 interview, Lei described her music as a shock to the face of Brazilian patriarchal society, and said that this Black and disenfranchised woman feeling, screaming about how she lives, what she needs to confront, how she deals with it, always evolving, always asserting that she's in the process of construction and deconstruction. Again, this quote shows how Lei feels her music is part of creating social change by bringing attention to the atrocities that happen to Brazilian women every day. It's apparent that through her music, Lei wants to teach women that they are powerful and should demand the respect that they deserve from society. So how do Brazilian musicians use music to combat normative ideas? This is Anitta, who is literally the queen of pop in Brazil right now. She's amazing. So she blatantly uses her sexuality and sensuality and body to combat Brazilian ideas of women as being passive. So she has a video called Vai Malandra, and conversations about it focused on Anitta's agency as a Brazilian mixed-race woman, the appropriation of blackness and the blurred lines between sexuality and objectification, again, which are strong themes in much of Brazilian feminist music today. Froyo cites Ivana Ventas, who stated the ass in women's bodies can move from objectification to subjectification. The unclothed nature of Brazilian women has been linked to ideas of inferiority and the notion of savages, which plays a role in the hypersexualization of mixed-race Brazilian women. While this tropical disposition is part of the mythology of hypersexual Brazilian women, this stereotype is also built using the figure of mixed-race Brazilian women, who is a symbol of both miscegenation and the whitening of a racialized other. Froyo posits that these tropes are exactly what Anitta is attempting to subvert in her Vai Malandra video, by wearing box braids and filming the video in the favela community of Vidigal. Anitta chooses to twerk for her own pleasure because dancing the funky is a way for Brazilian women to enjoy and celebrate their own bodies. She's not passively standing in the back to twerk. This is her song, her body, and she looks straight into the camera to make sure everyone knows that. So Carol Conká is another artist who very distinctly talks about female sexual pleasure. So one of her most popular songs is called Lala, and Lala is about the act of cunnilingus and female power. The first line in the song is translated to, "Wretched pampered boy who now cries, just because I told you to kneel," and goes on to say things like, "You hardly know the difference from a clitoris to an ovary." Yeah. These lyrics, paired with the imagery of men licking flowers in the faces of kittens with their tongues out, being superimposed onto the mouths of men, make it obvious what Conká is discussing. She is directly addressing the inequality of sexual pleasure between men and women in Brazil. The video for Lala was even censored on YouTube because some people deemed it inappropriate. In a 2017 interview, when asked about this censorship, Conká responded with, "I don't consider the video deserving of censorship. And I know that it's been censored due to a great number of people who are offended by it, that reported the video as inappropriate. It just proves how women's pleasure is still a taboo. Here in Brazil, we listen to many songs sung by men that talk about the male's organ, that put women in a submissive role. But when a woman talks about it, the subject becomes polemic, as if women's pleasure were non-existent. I wasn't surprised by the censorship. It was already expected from a society without information." So, my conclusions. They're pretty simple. Being a feminist in Brazil is different than supporting feminism. Feminists are seen as radical, and many of my participants often talked about them being women who took to the streets, who were loud, who were topless, and some of the current political rhetoric even talks about them defecating in the street and that they're unhygienic. So, also, while the musicians themselves see themselves as feminists and representing the feminist movement, many of my participants didn't think so. They thought that their lyrics were demeaning and that they weren't contributing to the empowerment of women. All of my participants felt that music could empower people, and especially with rap music in Brazil, that was something that they talked about as very empowering and how it could unite a generation to fight against some of the racial inequality and societal inequality that's happening in Brazil. So what I really think is happening is that musicians are using their position to fight for equal rights. Back to that idea of citizenship. They're fighting to dress how they please. They're fighting to live their lives how they want. And they're just fighting to be heard and acknowledged. Thank you.
Participants back up, or at least Obayed, Assad, Alex, and Alexis for questions. And do you guys want to go? Oh, we already have a question. Awesome. Go for it.
Alexis, I was, obviously with Bolsonaro's election, and you presumably conducted a lot of your research before that election happened,
I
and I was
did.
just wondering how you see that moment, which at least in international media has been presented really as this critical change, right, in domestic politics in Brazil, how you see that playing into this. Is this partly why Anita is so popular right now? Or is
Anita was popular before then. So I think this idea of the whole feminist music movement, I mean, yesterday I was riding home from Target with my mom, and NPR did a story on feminejo, which is feminist sertanejo, which is Brazilian country music. Something that I hadn't even heard about, even through doing my research. But the election of Bolsonaro led to a lot of different things. So during his election, there were incredible amounts of violence, and there still is incredible amounts of violence. I think there's something like an increase of at least 100 specifically hate crime deaths that have happened just after he was elected. Something that his minister, one of his ministers said was, boys wear blue and girls wear pink. And so one of the videos that I'm using in my research is a video called Buzina by Pablo Vittar. And in the video, he's a drag queen, by the way, but identifies as she while in her performance persona. In the video, she is an alien and she lands on the whatever planet she's going to. And the video distinctly, she has a pink wig and a blue wig and one pink eye of makeup and one blue eye of makeup. And so I think Bolsonaro being elected has really ignited a bit more of the feminist movement in Brazil, specifically with artists. Pablo Vittar, again, she did a performance for a very large televised thing and was lowered down from the ceiling and was put down onto the stage and screamed "Ele não!" which is like the calling card for the against Bolsonaro movement. So it's definitely created a lot of tensions. It has definitely changed a lot of things, and that was a very pertinent part of my research and something that I took into consideration, because after all these people gave me these interviews, I don't know if they still want me to use their information because it could get back to them. I mean, his son is tied to the murder of Marielle Franco in Brazil, so it's not, I wouldn't put it past him to use his position to do certain things. There's one back there. Yeah.
I have a question for Obed.
Yeah.
I'm an undergrad and I've always been interested in working in the UN. What advice would you give somebody who's looking to get into that career path?
Sorry, a bit louder.
I'm an undergrad and I've always been interested in working with the UN. And I was wondering, what kind of advice would you give a student who wants to pursue that career path?
Thank you very much for the very interesting question. In fact, the last slide of mine was with this. So I have more scope to make yourself understand, and to my understanding also, anybody is graduating from any universities in the US, because the education system is as such that you try to understand the culture of others. At the same time, you know exactly what is the culture of yourself. So to know yourself and to know what we always say in anthropological way, that we have to know what I do not know and we have to know what I know. So if you just know all these things, I think this is the best option to go for the UN. Having said that, this is the from the very outset you have to find out in the website that what are the perfect websites which are telling you to make a resume for the UN application, because thousands and millions of applications is coming to the UN desk every day. Especially the UN, I say again, UNDPKO, United Nations Peacekeeping Operation. There is a branch. So that looks after all this requirement. So you can go there and give your resume. You can wait, but liaison is a matter. You have to go in the New York in the UN headquarters, or you can communicate with the people you think that they can help, those who have a link with the UN, because somebody has to, you know, talk in favor of you. So from the very beginning, you target that, and from the very beginning, you try to enrich yourself with the UN system, because unless you make yourself projected, nobody will understand what you are. Our mere face does not say what we are, but our papers, our resume, our CV, curriculum vitae will say what we are. So you have to project in a fashion that you are really that person which UN is looking for. And after having education here, you go to a different places around the globe. Like right now in the CAR, Central African Republic, there is a big vacancies for the civilian staffs. So you can apply for that. But you have to write in that way that you have this experience, you learn these things. Say, I'm an anthropology graduate. I will write, yes, I learned about the cultural relativity. That says that all the cultures, we should not give a judgmental view. But in which department do you study?
Oh, I'm in psychology, but...
So psychology, you are very much with the psychological way of looking to a thing, that how do you perceive a culture, how do you like a pattern, and how do you say a thing in a naked eye and in a different with putting some glasses in your eyes. So put some glasses on your eyes and see in the language in the UN and apply it, and I bet that you will be one of the finest candidates to be selected. Thank you.
This was a question for, or actually two questions for Asad.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, two barriers really stuck out for me that you were kind of talking about with in terms of health access. One which was refugee resettlement organizations being chronically kind of underfunded and kind of overstretched in a way. And I was wondering if you saw any kind of space or useful space really for maybe less nonprofit organizations and much more something more along the lines of like companies, local companies specifically, that specifically seek to hire refugee populations and train them up because, XYZ, greater, understanding and resources and job training, things like that. So I'm wondering if you see those types of organizations possibly filling in that that particular weakness, that particular barrier. And then my second question was seeing if my understanding with the access to insurance and things like that might be time barred because recent immigrants are not allowed to actually access things like Medicaid. So I'm wondering if you would see maybe some of these refugee populations getting more interested in public options like Medicaid as time goes on and become eligible, or if they're so mistrustful of kind of American health insurance schemes that might not actually be something that would just be a function of time.
Okay, I'm going to for first questions is that refugee resettlement way when they came here and refugee resettlement staffs, they are trying to adapt with that system, especially they just keeping some training sessions and other sort of things is that. But after the one of the time period, they didn't get that type of facilities like that. When they just came here, that you can use that like that transportations that way, and you can cope up with that like that, and you need to get insurance for that. So that time, that when someone coming from other country in USA, that time they are feeling like some illusions like that, and that type of instructions, that type of guideline, maybe they can perceive that time, especially from the very beginning. But I think that's barriers, not only it's barriers, but resettlements way maybe it to be continued and for long times. Maybe maybe it's 5 years, maybe 4 years. It varies for people who don't know the speak English, who have no jobs, and that they are providing 8 months health insurance first time, but after that they have no options to get without money. So they need to buy insurance their pocket money, So in their home country, first they have no experience about the insurance policy, insurance way. So which insurance is better for them, and which insurance can provide the better health facilities for them. They don't know. They're totally blank about that from the very beginning. So I think in-depth way, resettlement or authorities can make a long program for them, and maybe it would be helpful for them. And another questions that was about what?
So yeah, I think you covered both my questions. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a question for Alex. I enjoyed your talk, and I'm wondering, in terms of thinking about ways to meaningfully improve the representation of trans people, not just across movies in general and different genres, but specifically in horror, where there's often so many exaggerated tropes, and those, especially the kind of ironic use of tropes with campy horror, things like that.
Right.
What are some ways in which you think that the sort of othering and medicalizing and pathologizing of trans bodies could be meaningfully dealt with? What do you think the future of that cinema might look like?
Well, I think in the sort of going on 30 years since Silence of the Lambs, it hasn't actually changed that much. So I don't necessarily have a lot of hope, if I'm being honest. Mostly because I think that a lot of those ideas are just deeply embedded in sort of, like, how do you tell a horror movie without these sort of tropes, right? Like, I think, like, you can change it, but I think, like, the way that, like, horror films work is on this sort of, like, interaction with the other, right? So trying to create films that, horror films especially, that de-otherize the other is, I think, kind of hard. I think in other areas of cinema, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that's not necessarily, like, unqualified, but it is, like, interesting. But I don't think within horror movies it's gonna improve much. I think it's just gonna either go away. Like, I think we've all seen a lot of those tropes go away if they're not funny or scary anymore. Like, we don't often see, like sort of, like, I mean, it used to be, like, very popular to have, like, a sort of gay character as, like, sort of the opponent or the antagonist. I think that's sort of gone away. So I don't think there's necessarily about improving representation as much as removing representation.
I had a follow-up, I just had a quick follow-up comment, just because I was listening to a sort of a film studies analysis of some of Jordan Peele's work. And specifically how Us, which I haven't seen because I'm a weenie, is
Me neither.
right. Oh, great. How Us is so different than Get Out, which I saw and loved, because Get Out was, in a lot of ways, playing directly to and interrogating these tropes, and
Right.
then Us, on the other hand, is being described as, it's not necessarily intending to make a black horror film with Us, but rather a good horror film that happens to center on a black family of protagonists.
Right.
And so, it's not to equate the two to what he does and what you're talking about, but the ideas of, in some ways reframing some of the gaze, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, you run a big risk when doing things like that, right? Because I don't think necessarily flipping the script is always going to solve all the problems. Sort of, because a lot of these are structural problems, right? Like, within the structure of the narrative. So I think, like, there's actually one thing that, like, Pablo Go talks about in Writing Against Culture. She talks about how, like, some feminists have tried to do this sort of, quoting, like, Edward Said, this, like, reverse Orientalism, where it's like, no, women aren't bad, women are actually good, women's culture is great, and it's men who are bad, blah, blah, blah. And how it doesn't actually really get at the differences there. So I think that, like, and this is not necessarily a criticism of Get Out, because I think it's, like, an awesome film. Like, I think that there's, like, some area of subversion in doing it. I just question how much, like, is actually being subverted in that. If it's keeping these sort of binary oppositions
fairly opposite. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Have you seen those actually?
Have I seen us? No, I have not.
Save the question then for when you do.
Okay.
So, kind of going off of that, do you see, because of the changes that are just now coming about for other marginalized groups, like, do you expect it to change? I mean, I know you kind of answered that already, but like with Black Panther, not just in horror, but like you have like Black Panther and then the, what is it, yeah, that one. Like, do you see that being a possibility, like within what you've researched?
Like, what, I guess, what do you mean by possibility?
Like, of it improving.
I think there's been like some strange attempts to do that.
Because I mean, they're very conscientious of these things that are happening within marginalized groups.
Right.
As directors.
Yeah, there's been a lot of, and like, I mean, I think a key difference there is that there's basically like no trans like movie makers, and not that like that's like a prerequisite, but I think that does have some sort of effect on it in that, because if you look at like older like blaxploitation films, they're terrible. Like, I mean, they're kind of amazing, but they're also like completely and utterly terrible, right? So I think that I'm specifically thinking if anyone's seen Tangerine, which is like a really interesting film that sort of does this. It's almost like creates this like suddenly like kind of like the protagonist is like a Black trans woman, but I don't necessarily think it's like a good representation at all. It sort of like creates the hero as an anti-hero, but it doesn't actually respond to that. So I think like something like Black Panther is like far off in that sort of like realm of things, but I think it's very uneven as well. Because I think a lot of like the progress that you're seeing, because people always talk about this, right? Like the progress with like trans characters. One thing that I know, and I have like 2 printed copies of like the full paper. It's like a chapter of my thesis if anyone wants it, but I can also just send it to you if you want it. So, side note. But you've seen a lot of those like films and like TV shows, like Transparent, where it sort of like stars like a titular like transparent in that case, but the entire narrative is sort of like about like, oh my god, what would it be like if you had a parent who was trans? Wouldn't that suck? So I think like there's a danger even in sort of like assuming the protagonist role. It's these things are deceptive. Like the symbology of it is very different than sort of like what's actually happening with the bodies on screen.
Why are you focusing on horror?
Cause I like horror movies. Honestly, I mean that like, I think like horror is just like, cause my thesis, this is one chapter of my thesis, right? The rest of my thesis is kind of different than this. But I think horror, really plays at the other in ways that, other films, they do, but they don't quite as much as like horror. Because horror sort of like relies on like this like paradoxical like fear and pleasure, and a lot of my thesis is just about like, hey, maybe disgust and pleasure and fear and all that stuff, maybe that sort of is existing sort of at the same time, or sort of bouncing off each other. But I guess I originally got interested because I started from this like very like medical anthropology project of like what's happening with like medicalization of trans bodies, like what's sort of happening there. And then I started realizing, oh no, they're like recreating the medicalization of trans bodies in horror movies constantly. Like Silence of the Lambs was a great example of, I won't get too far into it, but there are many great examples where it's just like, one good example is like Psycho versus Dressed to Kill. And Dressed to Kill is a Brian De Palma film that sort of cites Psycho in a way. And in Psycho, it's kind of psychologized, but it's not very medicalized. Whereas in Dressed to Kill, it's suddenly, which came out in 1980, which is suddenly like seen as this like complex medical, like psychiatric rather than psychological issue. So I think that's kind of where I came from, is like why, oh, all this medical discourse is just sort of everywhere in horror films.
So for Alex, first of all, great presentation. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks.
But also, you talked about how we kind of, or as some of these protagonists, like the final girl, kind of derives pleasure from these like acts that they're kind of performing. Could you speak more on like sort of the opposite, how we kind of, opposite of pleasure, which is like disgust or abjection as it is.
Right. I mean, I think that they're sort of in these films. They're kind of coming at the same time. There's a quote by Noel Carroll, which I just decided to not read because I don't want to take too long. But she talks about how in order to account for the interest we take in and the pleasure we take from horror, we may hypothesize that in the main, the locus of our gratification is not the monster as such, but the whole narrative structure that sort of presents the monster. And I think that's sort of interesting to work with. Like, it's not necessarily about like the actual like this disgust sort of turns itself into pleasure, right? Like they're sort of existing simultaneously. Like, what do we have disgust for? What are we deriving pleasure from? And I think they're all sort of coming together at the same time. And what's sort of a disavow of pleasure, if not disgust?
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I
just had one question for you, Alexis. So in terms of women not identifying as feminists, but saying they support the feminist movement, but then also seeing the artists who identify as feminists as not feminists. Yeah. Do you get a sense from your participants as to what their feminism is? Even if it's not something that they would label as such, like are they just reproducing or sort of expressing this internalized standards of behavior, or?
And actually piggyback on this one. Yeah. So also in terms of so part of what I was wondering about, right, very similarly to this, is also like how do people actually produce music? Right, so what are the contexts in which they're coming in contact with the songs and the videos and all this kind of stuff, and how might that kind of the consumption avenue play a role in this?
Okay, so to deal with Dr. Turner's question first, so I did get a very distinct idea of what their idea of feminism was. So when I asked them, some of them I asked point blank, like, what is your definition of feminism? And every single time, all of them said equality. So the whole idea was like, they saw feminists, like the main thing that how they saw feminists was that feminists think women are better than men. I'm not saying that women are better than men. I'm saying that we're equal. I want to fight. I fight for equality. I fight for equal pay. I fight for equal rights. I fight for equality. Equality of gender was the big overarching idea of what feminism was to them. Not that men are less than or women are more than, just general equality, which honestly I do think kind of feeds back into the idea of like passivity with women, and that I can fight for equality, but I can't be loud about it, or I can't like write things across my chest and take to the streets as a woman because that's that's not acceptable. That's not feminism. That's just being radical and scary. And so in terms of consumption, the music that I'm using in my research, which originally started out as just rap. I originally started out looking at just feminist rap in Brazil. And I realized quite quickly that, number one, none of my participants had any idea who the hell these artists were that I was talking about. Or didn't know them by name. Occasionally people would say, oh, that song, yeah, I've heard of it. But I don't listen to it. And so that was another kind of popular thing, is that a lot of the songs that I'm talking about belong to the genre of funky. And when I started talking about funky to my participants, they often said, I only listen to that at parties. Like, funky is just for parties. And I don't listen to that at home. Like, that's not something I'm gonna go out of my way to listen to. But yet, they're still at the top of the charts. Like, when I quite religiously listen to the top 50 Spotify playlist for Brazil, there's always one of my artists, like Anita especially, in that top 50. Like it's popular, but when I'm talking about people like Caro Conca and Lay and MC Carol, they're kind of underground in a way. And so it's mostly people who live in favela communities, which are the informal housing communities, and people in low income areas, and especially Black people. Like, Black people in Brazil consume music a lot differently than the white people in Brazil. And that's one of the, not failures, but one of the places in my research that I could really improve upon is that I didn't have nearly as many producers of music as I wanted, because I know that the way that the actual producers of this music construct their idea of feminism and how people who consume this music construct their idea of feminism is completely different. And I don't have enough of that voice in my research. I also don't have enough voice of Black women in my research, because I only had one. And that was just due to the fact that I used a convenient sampling, and I used a lot of people that I already had personal relationships with. I used who was at my disposal. And so in the future, I want to really dig into, I have a whole list of artists and contact information that I will hopefully use for PhD research, to really kind of dig into how music producers feel that their music is being consumed, and how they feel that their messages are being felt, and how they want them to be felt.
Also, kind of questions of what is the distribution system to begin with, and what kind of corporate or non-corporate interest play with radio and
TV and for sure. Absolutely. Because Globo, which is is the biggest media outlet in Brazil, is quite polemic in itself. So when I was in Brazil, in Rio, starting my field research, I actually saw a tag, a graffiti tag on top of the building that said, "Globo is manipulating you." So my research is incredibly complicated in such a way that oftentimes I don't even know what to do with it, because there are so many intersections, and it's not like these intersections can be dealt with individually, because they literally all play into each other. And that's just the complicated nature of Brazil that I fell in love with and just can't get away from. So I've doomed myself to complicatedness. Yes?
It was just, I suppose, just asking a question. My experience in Latin America is in South America, more in other parts, but my brief experience in Brazil kind of resonated with mine. And the way in which music is everywhere, right? I think this question about consumption is important, right? Here, you consume music in, my sense, in certain spaces, right? But you're on the bus and there's music, you're on the street and there's multiple, and I think that consumption question is really interesting. You don't necessarily choose it, it's there the whole time. And I'm just wondering if that might be a factor in it.
I think it definitely is. Within my own experiences in Brazil, just going back to the field school, we went into a specific favela community, and not even just there, but all of the places that we went, I was just so intrigued by the soundscape, because there's, as you said, there's literally music everywhere. There's people walking down the street playing music. It doesn't matter what time of night. It can be 3 a.m. and there's still going to be somebody outside on the street playing their little guitar, walking around asking for money. And the fact that when we went into the one specific favela community, there was a song called Romance Safadeza, which is by an artist, Wesley Safadão, and Anitta. And the fact that I heard it and I started driving along with it, and I was singing along, and the person who was leading the tour was like, "I'm sorry, you know this song?" And it's yeah, I know this song. And you're right, there's music just everywhere. It is not a choice to listen to music in Brazil. And that was another part of my research, and it was integral to my research, is the fact that music in Brazil is a way of life. It's not separate from anything. Music is essential to Brazilian identity, and that's probably tied into like the idea of carnivalization and this sensuality that is legitimately inherent in Brazilian society, because like dancing, drinking, partying is just the Brazilian way, and so you can't hide from it. And you're absolutely right. That's gonna, in the future, that idea of music being integral to life in Brazil will inevitably have to be part of that research.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our presenters, including our poster session presenters. I think that this has been just an incredible example of the amazing diversity of work that our department does. And so I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. And again, thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you to our sponsors, the Consulate of Greece, the GSU Anthropology Club, as well as our alumni donors. Yeah, thank you everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.